Captain Elias Thorne gripped the armrest as the bridge alarms blared, red lights strobing across the faces of his crew. "Status," he barked, eyes locked on the view screen where the alien fleet loomed like jagged shadows against the nebula's glow. Lieutenant Kira Voss, his tactical officer, didn't look up from her console, fingers flying over holographic controls. "They're locking weapons, sir. 5 cruisers, all broadcasting that same declaration. We, the Evolved Council, claim supremacy over this sector. Primitive species. Stand down or perish." Thorne's jaw tightened. The Council, those self-proclaimed superiors from the core worlds, had been pushing their borders for months, dismissing humanity as relics. But out here, on the edge of uncharted space, relics had teeth. "Hail them. Audio only." The comms crackled to life and a voice slithered through, smooth and condescending, laced with synthetic undertones. "Human vessel, this is High Arbiter Lyrax of the Evolved Council. Your interference ends now. Surrender your ship, or we will demonstrate our evolution." Thorne leaned forward, his voice steady as steel. "Arbiter Lyrax, this is Captain Thorne of the UNS Vanguard. Your evolution doesn't extend to our territory. Power down, or we'll show you what primitives can do." A pause, then laughter echoed from the speaker. Cold, programmed mirth. "Quaint. Fire at will." Missiles streaked from the lead cruiser, silent predators in the void. Voss's hands blurred. "Evasive maneuvers. Point defense online." The ship lurched as the first impacts shook the hull, sparks erupting from a nearby panel. Ensign Marco Ruiz, the young engineer at the auxiliary station, cursed under his breath, patching systems on the fly. "Shields at 72%, Captain. They're modulating frequencies. Our arrays can't keep up." Thorne nodded once, his mind racing through options. The Vanguard was a scout frigate built for speed, not slugfests against a fleet like this. But running meant abandoning the colony they'd come to protect. "Helm, plot a course through the nebula. Use the interference to mask us. Voss, target their sensor arrays. Blind them first." The ship banked hard, engines thrumming as it dove into the swirling gases. Purple tendrils of ionized clouds whipped past the view screen, distorting the stars. Ruiz wiped sweat from his brow. "Nebula's playing havoc with our nav. Readings flickering. If we push deeper, we might lose the colony's beacon." "Do it," Thorne said, unbuckling his harness. He stood, the deck vibrating under his boots. "Kira, what's their formation?" "Tight wedge, sir. Arrogant, assuming we'll break easy." Voss's eyes narrowed, a wry smile tugging at her lips despite the chaos, like they evolved past basic tactics. Thorne allowed himself a grim chuckle. "Let's remind them evolution favors the adaptable." He crossed to Ruiz's station, scanning the damage readouts. A coolant line had ruptured in engineering. If it spread, they'd be dead in the water. The comms pinged again. Lyrax's voice edged with irritation. "You flee into the unknown, human. Pathetic. Our sensors will pierce your veil." "Not if we pierce yours first," Thorne muttered, then raised his voice. "All hands. Battle stations. We're not extinct yet." Explosions bloomed outside as Vanguard's railguns spat fire, the shots curving through the nebula's haze. One alien sensor pod shattered in a silent bloom of debris, and Voss whooped. "Direct hit. Their lead ship's blind on port side." But the fleet adjusted, fanning out, their beams lancing through the clouds like accusatory fingers. A glancing hit rocked the bridge, hurling Ruiz from his chair. He hit the deck hard, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Marco!" Thorne was there in an instant, hauling him up. "Talk to me." Ruiz blinked, shaking it off with that stubborn grit all engineers seem to carry. "I'm good, sir, but that hit fried the secondary power grid. We're down to 40% on weapons." Thorne clapped his shoulder, mind already shifting. The Council's tech was sleek, evolved, modular shields, adaptive AI. But humans, they improvised. "Patch it through the auxiliary vents. Route emergency power from life support if you have to." As Ruiz scrambled back to work, Thorne returned, to his command chair. The nebula's eerie light casting long shadows. The fleet was closing, their declarations forgotten in the heat of pursuit. One wrong move, and the Vanguard would be scrap, along with the hope of proving humanity's place in the stars. Voss glanced over, her voice low. "They're herding us, Captain. Toward the gravity well." Thorn's fingers drummed the armrest. "Time to turn the herd. Helm, full burn. Take us straight into it." The bridge shuddered as the Vanguard's engines roared to life, thrusting the ship toward the swirling maw of the gravity well. Alarms blared in staccato bursts, red lights pulsing across the consoles like a frantic heartbeat. Thorn gripped the armrests, his knuckles whitening against the worn leather, eyes locked on the viewscreen where the Council's sleek vessels arced in pursuit, their formation tightening like a noose. "Gravity shear in 30 seconds, Ensign Hale called from the helm, her voice steady but laced with the edge of someone who'd seen too many simulations turn real. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't wipe it away. Focus was survival. Voss leaned forward, her tactical display flickering with incoming fire patterns. "They're firing disruptors, shields at 62% and dropping. If we hit that well without stabilizing..." "We won't," Thorn cut in, his tone clipped, brooking no doubt. He punched the comms. "Engineering, Ruiz. Give me everything you've got on inertial dampers. No half measures." Down in the bowels of the ship, Ruiz wiped grease from his brow with a rag that had long since given up on clean. The auxiliary vents hummed with rerouted power, sparks flying as he jury-rigged the power grid. "On it, Cap, but life support's dipping to 70%. Crew's gonna feel the burn." Thorn didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. The nebula's tendrils clawed at the hull, distorting sensor readings into a kaleidoscope of false echoes. The Council. Ships, 3 of them, angular predators with hulls that shimmered like liquid mercury, fanned out, their captains no doubt smug in their evolved certainty. Humanity was the upstart, the relic declared obsolete by the Galactic Council after the skirmishes on Epsilon Verge. But Thorn knew better. Evolution wasn't in their tech, it was in the refusal to break. A jolt rocked the deck, and Voss swore under her breath. Direct hit on port side, hull integrity at 89%. Hale's hands flew over the controls. Adjusting course, evasive pattern delta. Too late. The lead Council frigate unleashed a barrage, beams slicing through the void. One grazed the Vanguards. Flank, shearing off a sensor array in a burst of molten debris, the ship lurched, gravity tugging unevenly as they skimmed the well's event horizon. "Brace!" Thorn barked, the word barely out before the world tilted. Consoles sparked, and a panel burst open beside Voss, acrid smoke filling the air. She coughed, slamming it shut with a boot while rerouting fire control. Ruiz's voice crackled over the intercom. "Dampers holding for now, but that well's pulling us like a black hole's little brother. We slingshot out or we kiss the debris field goodbye." Thorn nodded to himself, calculating angles in his head. The Council's plan was clear. Herd them into the well, let the gravity do the dirty work. No need for a fair fight when physics could end it. But humans didn't play fair. They played smart. "Voss, target their lead ship's nacelles. Low-yield torpedoes. Make 'em scatter." She grinned fiercely, fingers dancing. "Aye, sir. Firing." The torpedoes streaked out, lazy arcs in the distorted space. The Council captain anticipated, deploying countermeasures that bloomed like digital flowers. But Thorn had bet on the improvisation. "Hale, roll a starboard. Expose the ventral thrusters." The maneuver was brutal, G-forces slamming the crew into their harnesses. Hale gritted her teeth, fighting the controls as the ship spun. In that instant, the Vanguard's underbelly lit, up emergency vents blasting superheated plasma in a makeshift flare. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The Council's sensors overloaded, painting ghosts across their targeting arrays. "They're veering off," Voss whooped, her voice raw. The lead frigate banked hard, its formation fracturing as the others hesitated. But the well wasn't done. The ship groaned, metal protesting as tidal forces clawed at the seams. A bulkhead in the corridor beyond the bridge buckled with a screech, and somewhere aft, a power conduit ruptured, lights dimming to emergency red. "Shields critical," Voss reported, her triumph fading. "One more hit and we're venting atmo." Thorn's mind raced. The slingshot could fling them clear, but not without cost. Life support was already strained. Push it further, and half the crew blacked out. He glanced at Hale, her face pale but determined, then at Voss, who met his gaze with a nod that said she was in, whatever the play. Engineering, divert all auxiliary to forward baffles. We're going to surf this thing. Ruiz's reply was a grunt. Surfing a gravity well? You're insane, Cap, but yeah, hold tight. The Vanguard dove deeper, the view screen warping as space bent around them. The Council ships regrouped, closing in from the flanks, their weapons charging with an ominous whine over the comms. Thorn felt the pull in his bones, a reminder that out here, evolution meant adapting or dying. One of the pursuing vessels fired wildly, the beam glancing off the baffles in a shower of deflected energy. It bought them seconds. Hale whooped as the ship stabilized, riding the well's curve like a wave about to crest. Coming around, velocity peaking. The nebula rushed past, a blur of violet and shadow. Thorn allowed himself a breath. They were turning the herd, but the Council's pride wouldn't let them quit easy. And as the Vanguard hurtled toward open space, he knew the real fight was just igniting. Thorn gripped the armrests as the Vanguard's engines thrummed, pushing them out of the nebula's grasping tendrils. The view screen cleared, stars sharpening into pinpricks against the void. But the Council's signatures blinked relentlessly on the tactical overlay. 3 cruisers fanning out like wolves circling a wounded prey. They're matching our vector, Hale said, her voice steady over the intercom from engineering. Fingers danced across holographic controls, rerouting power from life support to the baffles. But we've got the edge in slipstream. If we punch it now, a proximity alarm wailed, cutting her off. One of the cruisers had closed the gap, its forward array glowing with charged plasma. Thorn's jaw tightened. No time for subtlety. Evasive pattern delta. Roll a starboard and fire countermeasures. The ship bucked as inertial dampeners strained, the deck tilting underfoot. Ensign Rao at the weapons console punched the release. Decoy flares erupted from the stern, blooming into false heat signatures that drew the first volley wide. The plasma streaked past, close enough to rattle the hull plating. Got 'em chasing ghosts, Rao muttered, a grin cracking his usual stoic mask. The young engineer wiped sweat from his brow, his quick hands already priming the railguns. He'd been the one to jury-rig the decoys from scrapped probe parts back on the colony run. Human grit turning scrap into salvation. But the lead cruiser adjusted, its AI predicting their role with eerie precision. Another shot lanced out, this one grazing the port nacelle. Alarms blared anew, red lights pulsing across the bridge. Shield integrity at 60%, Hale reported, her tone sharpening. That hit cooked the outer emitters. We're leaking plasma. Fix will take minutes we don't have. Thorn's mind raced. The Council preached evolution as their divine right. Ships built on millennia of unchallenged supremacy. But humans? We scraped by on instinct and improvisation. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the overlay. Rao, target their sensor arrays. Blind the bastards. Hale, vent the excess from the nacelle. Make it look like we're venting atmosphere. Biased out. Rao nodded, his fingers blurring. Twin railgun bursts spat from the Vanguard. Slugs accelerated to hypersonic speed, slamming into the cruiser's forward dome. Shards of alloy sparkled in the starlight as the enemy's targeting faltered. Shots going wild. Down in engineering, Hale sealed a bulkhead and triggered the vent. A plume of superheated gas billowed out, mimicking a critical breach. On the tactical feed, the Council's formation hesitated, their vaunted logic weighing the illusion of a dying ship. It worked for a heartbeat. The lead cruiser peeled off, signaling the others to encircle rather than pursue head-on. Thorn exhaled, but the relief soured fast. Open space stretched ahead, a gateway to the fringe systems where human outposts clung like barnacles. If they made it, reinforcements could rally. If not, they're adapting, Hale's voice crackled through. Flanking us at Vector 270. We push the engines harder. We risk a cascade failure. Thorn stood, pacing the cramped bridge. The air hummed with the scent of ozone and recycled sweat. Rao glanced up, his dark eyes questioning. Hale patched in via holo, her face smeared with grease, that cautious spark in her expression, the one that always preceded her best ideas. Talk to me, Thorn said. What's our play? Hale's holo flickered. The well we rode out of the nebula, it's still echoing. Residual gravity waves. If we slingshot back toward it, use the interference to mask our signature. Rao leaned in. Risky. Could tear us apart if the timing's off. Thorn waited, the ship's hum vibrating through his boots. The Council wouldn't expect desperation from primitive humans. Do it, plot the curve. Rao, keep those rails hot. The Vanguard veered, engines flaring blue as they arced back toward the nebula's edge. The pursuing cruisers followed, their formations tightening like a noose. Thorn watched the distance close on the overlay, the gravity well's distortion rippling the stars. Then it hit. The first feedback wave slammed into them, the ship groaning as space warped. Consoles sparked and Rao cursed, wrestling a jammed turret. Hale's voice cut sharp, holding 30 seconds to peak. A Council beam pierced the interference, scoring the hull amidships. The impact shuddered through the frame, lights dimming as secondary systems tripped. Thorn braced against the console, tasting blood from a bitten lip. Loss mounting, but they were committed now. Peak, Hale shouted. Thorn stabbed the command. The Vanguard surfed the wave, velocity spiking as the nebula's pull flung them clear. The cruisers overshot, tangled in the distortion, their precise maneuvers crumbling into chaos. Stars wheeled, then steadied. The overlay showed the enemies limping, signatures fading into the haze. We did it, Rao breathed, slumping back. Thorn didn't smile. The damage report scrolled in. Hull breaches, engine strain, one crewman down in the hit. The Council's pride was dented, but they'd come again. Out here, survival was just the first evolution. Hale's hollow grinned faintly. Fringe beacon in range. Home stretch. Thorn nodded, settling into the command chair. The void ahead felt a little less empty. Thorn gripped the armrests as the Vanguard's engines hummed back to life, the ship's frame groaning under the strain of their narrow escape. The nebula's glow faded in the rear-view screen, replaced by the stark pinpricks of distant stars. Rao wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers dancing over the console to reroute power from non-essentials. Shields at 40%, Captain. We can't take another hit like that. Hale's holographic form flickered in the corner of the bridge, her image projected from the auxiliary medbay. Fringe beacons pinging strong. If we push the thrusters, we shave an hour off the run, but the Council's cruisers aren't done. They'll regroup soon. Her voice carried that familiar edge, the one that masked her limp from the old leg injury. She leaned forward in the hollow, eyes sharp. What's the play? Thorn scanned the tactical overlay, red blips of the enemy ships clustering like angry wasps in the haze. The Council's vaunted evolution hadn't saved them from their own precision. They'd flown right into the distortion wave the humans had surfed. But pride like theirs didn't fade easy. We don't run blind, he said, voice steady. Rao, plot a micro-jump to the beacon's shadow. Use the debris field for cover. Hale, get your team prepping the cargo bay. If we need to ditch and weave. I want options. Rao nodded, his cautious nature showing in the way he double-checked each calculation, fingers hovering before committing. Jump in 30. But Captain, the engines are hot. One more strain and we might limp the rest of the way. The ship lurched as the micro-jump engaged, stars streaking into lines before snapping back. The fringe beacon loomed ahead, a battered human relay station orbiting a gas giant, its lights pulsing like a lifeline. Thorn felt the pull of it, the promise of resupply and word from the colonies. But as the Vanguard closed in, alarms blared. A new signature bloomed on the overlay, not Council cruisers but something sleeker, a scout drone detaching from the beacon's hull. They're here already, Thorn muttered, slamming the comms. Haley, status! Her hollow glitched for a second. Drones jamming our approach vector. It's Council's tech. Evolved adaptive shielding. If we dock blind, it'll shred us. Rao's face paled. Evading now, but it's matching our burn. We can't outrun it without blowing the engines. Thorn's mind raced, the bridge lights casting harsh shadows across his weathered features. The Council had declared themselves the pinnacle of evolution. Their ships grown from bioengineered hulls that learned and adapted. Humanity? We'd been written off as primitives, scavenging the fringes. But primitives knew grit. Rao, vent plasma from the auxiliary ports, make it look like we're venting drive fluid. Lure the drone in close. Rao hesitated, his witty retort dying on his lips as he saw the logic. That'll fry our outer sensors. Risky as hell. Do it. Thorn's order cut through the tension, brave resolve hardening his jaw. The ship shuddered as plasma bloomed from the side vents. A false trail of distress. The drone veered, its sensors fooled by the mimicry of a failing drive. It closed, weapons priming with a whine that echoed through the hull. Hale's voice crackled over the intercom. Cargo bay's rigged. Say the word and we eject the decoy pod. Full burn to mask our signature. Thorn watched the drone on the screen, its form a sleek arrow of alien design, evolved to hunt without mercy. Now, the pod launched with a thunderous jolt, streaking toward the drone like a crippled escape craft. The enemy fired, lasers slicing through the void, but the pod's improvised flares, cobbled from mining charges, erupted in a blinding cascade. The drone twisted, caught in the explosion's edge, its adaptive shields flickering as shrapnel tore into its flank. "Got it," Rao whooped, the caution cracking into rare excitement. The overlay showed the drone spiraling, disabled but not destroyed. Thorn eased the Vanguard into the beacon's docking clamp, the ship locking with a solid thunk. But as the airlock cycled, damage alerts scrolled. The plasma vent had scarred the hull, and Rao's quick fix meant they'd fly lopsided until repairs. The Council's scout was a warning. They'd marked this fringe post now, and the humans' fragile network just got shorter. Hale materialized at the bridge hatch, her real form limping slightly but grin intact. "That was human as it gets, Captain. But they're closing the noose." Thorn stood, clapping Rao on the shoulder. "Then we cut it sharper." The beacon's corridor stretched ahead, dim and echoing, but the crew moved with purpose. Extinction? The Council could try. Thorn's boots echoed down the beacon's central spine, the corridor's emergency lights flickering like a heartbeat on the fritz. Hale kept pace beside him, her limp more pronounced now that the adrenaline had ebbed, but she waved off his glance with a sharp "save it." Rao trailed, toolkit slung over his shoulder, already muttering about rerouting power from the auxiliary nodes to mask their signature. The air hummed with the faint ozone of stressed recyclers, and beyond the bulkheads, the void pressed in, silent, indifferent. They reached the command nexus first, a cramped blister of consoles and holoscreens that overlooked the fringe station's dwindling sensor net. Thorn punched in his override, the main display blooming to life with a star field dotted by red blips. Council patrols, tightening their grid. "They're not probing anymore," he said, voice low and steady. "That's a containment sweep. We light up on their scopes and this post's done." Hale leaned against the console, pulling up the drone's last feed. The overlay replayed in grainy bursts, the scout's sleek form twisting as Rao's jury-rigged pulse hit it. Not enough to vaporize, but plenty to scramble its nav. "Lucky shot," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. "But they know we're here." That thing broadcasted before it went dark. Rao slotted into a side panel, his fingers dancing over exposed wiring. Sparks jumped, but he didn't flinch. "I've got a workaround. Siphon the beacon's core output through the docking clamps. Make the Vanguard look like dead mass. Buys us time to ghost out." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Unless they board, then we're improvising with what we've got." Thorn nodded, scanning the tactical overlay. The Council's noose was literal now. 3 cruisers arcing in from the system's edge, their trajectories designed to pinch the escape vectors. No grand fleet, just efficient hunters, evolved they called themselves, with tech that bent physics like putty. But humans? They bent rules. Hale, rally the outpost crew, get non-essentials evacuated to the lower bays. Rao locked that cloak. "We're not running blind." She pushed off the console, her grin flickering back despite the pain. "On it, Captain. But if we're cutting the noose, make it count." She limped out, comms already buzzing with terse orders to the scattered techs and miners hunkered in the hab modules. Minutes stretched like taut cable. Rao's hands blurred in the guts of the panel, splicing conduits with makeshift jumpers scavenged from the drone's wreckage. Thorn watched the blips close, calculating burn times in his head. The Vanguard could outrun 1 cruiser, maybe 2 if they slingshotted the asteroid belt. But 3? That was attrition, and they couldn't afford the bleed. A klaxon wailed, proximity alert. The lead cruiser had pinged them, a polite query laced with scanners that would peel the cloak like foil if Rao's fix faltered. "Holding," the engineer grunted, sweat beading on his dark skin. "Redirecting now." "There." The console lights dimmed, then steadied. On the overlay, the Vanguard's icon blurred into static. Just another chunk of debris in the debris field. But the Council wasn't done. The feed caught it, a boarding pod detaching from the cruiser's underbelly, sleek and silent, arrowing toward the beacon's outer lock. No hails, no warnings, just inevitability. Thorn's jaw set. "They're testing us. Rao, seal all externals except the Vanguard's clamp. Hale, get your people armed, whatever we've got. Welders, tools, those old railguns from the stores." Her voice crackled over the comm. "Copy. Miners are geared up. Stubborn bunch. Say they've waited years for a scrap." The pod latched with a distant thud transmitted through the deck plates. Alarms escalated, red washing the nexus. Thorn gripped the console edge, eyes on the schematic. The breach was 2 levels down near the power relays. If the boarders hit those, Rao's cloak died, and so did their window. "Captain," Rao said, voice tight as he yanked a final wire into place. "Pod's got breaching charges. They'll be through in under 2. Thorn drew his sidearm, an old kinetic pistol that spat lead where energy weapons fizzled in the Council's jamming fields. "Then we meet them halfway. Improvise the welcome." They moved as one, Thorn leading down the access ladder, Rao covering with a plasma cutter humming in his grip. The air grew thicker, laced with the acrid bite of melting seals. Hale's team funneled in from the side passages, hard-faced men and women in patched vac suits clutching makeshift spears and shock prods. No speeches, just nods and shared glances that said they'd bleed before yielding. The breach exploded inward, venting atmosphere in a howling gale. Council troops poured through, tall, elongated figures in iridescent armor, their weapons glowing with contained fury. Evolved precision, moving like synchronized blades. Thorn fired first, the pistol's bark cutting the chaos. A boarder staggered, armor cracking under the slug's blunt force. Rao's cutter slashed out, superheated edge shearing a rifle barrel clean. Hale lunged from the flank, her team swarming with raw, unpolished fury. Welders arcing blue lightning into joints, prods jamming visors. The fight was brutal, close quarters frenzy in the strobing emergency lights. One miner went down, gutted by a vibro blade, his cry lost in the roar. Thorn took a glancing stun from a Council sidearm, vision blurring, but he rolled through, slamming his elbow into the attacker's helm. It cracked. The figure slumped. They pushed back, step by bloody step, herding the boarders toward the outer lock. Rao rigged a quick overload on the panel, his fingers dancing over the jury-rigged controls, sparks flying as he twisted wires into a makeshift bomb. The overload hummed to life, a low whine building in the corridor's confines. Thorn wiped blood from his split lip. Pistol trained on the last cluster of boarders huddled near the airlock. Hale dragged the wounded miner behind a crate, her hands pressing a rag to his gut, but his breaths came ragged, eyes glazing. "Fire in the hole!" Rao shouted, voice barely audible over the din. He slammed the panel shut and hurled the device, a scavenged power cell wrapped in conductive mesh, toward the enemy line. It skittered across the deck, bouncing once before lodging against a boot. The boarders froze, their sleek helmets tilting in unison as if calculating escape vectors. Too late. The cell detonated in a bloom of plasma, shredding armor and flinging bodies into the bulkhead. Shrapnel pinged off walls, and the acrid stench of burned composites filled the air. Thorn ducked as a fragment whizzed past, embedding in the crate beside him. Hale looked up, her face streaked with grime. "That's the last of them." "Locks holding?" Thorn nodded, holstering his weapon. He keyed the comm panel, voice steady despite the throb in his temple. "Bridge, this is engineering deck. Boarders neutralized. Casualties, 2 down, 1 critical. We need medevac now." Static crackled, then Captain Ellis's voice cut through. "Copy that, Thorn. Shuttle's inbound, but sensors are lighting up. More incoming from the Council's frigate. You have 5 minutes to seal and brace." Rao slumped against the wall, cutter still glowing faintly in his grip. 5 minutes? "They're not giving us a breather. Those bastards evolve, they say, adapt to anything, but they didn't count on us turning their own scrap against them." Thorn scanned the corridor, bodies strewn like discarded puppets, their iridescent armor cracked and venting atmosphere. One twitched, clawing at a breached seal, but Hale was there first, stomping down with her boot until it stilled. No mercy in her eyes, just the hard resolve of someone who'd lost too many shifts to these raids. "Help me with him," she said to Rao, nodding at the miner. They lifted him carefully, his weight sagging between them as they shuffled toward the medbay access. Thorn covered their retreat, stepping over a severed limb that gleamed unnaturally like polished obsidian. The ship's alarm shifted pitch, a deeper warning tone echoing through the vents. Hull breach protocols engaged, bulkheads groaning as they sealed off compromised sections. Thorn paused at the junction, peering through a viewport. Outside, the void stretched black, punctured by the distant sparkle of the Council's fleet. Elegant spires of vessels that outclassed their battered hauler in every metric except sheer stubborn will. Back in the medbay, Rao laid the miner on the autodock table. The machine whirred to life, scanners beeping as it assessed the damage. Hale punched coordinates into the evac beacon. her fingers trembling just once before steadying. If that shuttle's late, we're all ghosts. Thorn entered, sealing the door behind him. Not today. Ellis is rerouting power to the point defenses. But we can't just wait, Rao. You rigged that overload. Can you do something with the auxiliary thrusters? Give us a nudge away from their boarding arc. Rao grinned, wiping sweat from his brow, the wit in his eyes undimmed by fatigue. Thrusters? Hell, I can make this old girl dance, but it'll burn out the coils. Next jump, we're limping. Do it, Thorn said, no hesitation. He turned to Hale. You and I secure the cargo hold. If they breach again, they don't get the ore or the data core. She nodded, grabbing a fresh prod from the rack. They moved as a unit, Thorn's cautious steps balancing her bold charges through flickering corridors where emergency lights cast long shadows. The ship shuddered as Rao's improvisation kicked in, a jolt that sent them stumbling but pulled the hauler sideways, out of the frigate's direct line. In the hold, crates of raw elixium loomed like silent sentinels, the mineral's faint blue glow illuminating stacks of equipment. Thorn wedged a brace against the main hatch while Hale wired a secondary alarm. This stuff's what they want, she muttered. Our edge in the outer rims powers their evolution tech, keeps our rigs running. A distant explosion rocked the deck, vibrations humming through the soles of their boots. Thorn's comm buzzed. Incoming fire, Ellis reported. Shields at 30%. Hold tight. Hale met Thorn's gaze, her caution yielding to the fire in her gut. They declared themselves gods. Time we show 'em dust. The next hit came harder, a screech of metal as the hull flexed. Sparks rained from overhead conduits and the data core's console flickered, its encrypted logs of council movements pulsing like a heartbeat. Thorn reinforced the wiring, his brave hands steady amid the chaos. Rao's voice broke in, terse and triumphant. Thrusters firing, evasive pattern alpha. Bias 2 minutes, but the cost mounted. The wounded miner's vitals flatlined on the med bay feed Thorn glimpsed on a wall screen. Hale cursed under her breath, slamming a fist into a crate. No time to mourn. The hatch groaned under pressure, faint hisses signaling micro-breaches. Thorn drew his pistol again, positioning beside Hale. Together, he said simply. She raised her prod, arc crackling. The ship twisted, Rao's grit pulling them clear. But the frigate's beam lanced close, shearing a sensor array. Alarms wailed, but they held. In that suspended moment, as the shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a thunderous clang, the shuttle shuddered into the bay of the battered corvette, its hull scarred from a dozen skirmishes. Thorn holstered his pistol, sweat stinging his eyes as he helped Hale drag the last crate toward the inner airlock. The miner's body lay forgotten in the cargo hold. Time would claim its due later. Rao's voice crackled over the intercom, edged with fatigue. Docking secure. But that frigate's not done. They're matching vectors. We got maybe 5 minutes before they board. Hale wiped grime from her face, her cautious eyes scanning the flickering readouts on the shuttle's panel. 5 minutes? That's optimistic. Sensors show their weapons hot. Council bastards don't bluff. She glanced at Thorn, her prod still humming faintly in her grip. You good? He nodded, brave resolve hardening his jaw. Lead the way. I've got your back. No more words needed. They moved as one, sealing the shuttle behind them and sprinting into the corvette's dim corridors. The ship groaned under emergency power, red emergency lights casting long shadows that danced like specters. Rao met them at the bridge hatch, her wiry frame tense, fingers flying over the console. Strap in, she barked, witty spark dimmed by the grind. I've rerouted auxiliary power to shields, but it's patchwork. One solid hit, and we're vapor. The bridge was a cramped nerve center, screens alive with tactical overlays, the hum of life support a constant undercurrent. Thorn dropped into the co-pilot's seat, pulling up nav charts while Hale manned the weapons station. The frigate loomed on the main viewer, its sleek alien lines a stark contrast to the corvette's rugged human design, elegant predator versus stubborn mule. They're hailing, Rao said, her voice terse. Ignore it? Damn right, Hale replied, her fingers itching over the firing controls. Last time they talked, they glassed a colony. But Thorn held up a hand, eyes narrowing at the incoming signal. Something in the pattern felt off, not the usual council bluster. Wait, patch it through audio only. Might buy us intel. Static hissed, then a voice emerged, smooth and synthetic, laced with that evolved arrogance the council always peddled. Human vessel, this is Overseer Vex of the Evolved Concord. Surrender your fugitive assets. Resistance is inefficient. Thorn leaned forward, his voice steady. Fugitive assets? You mean the miners you starved out? We're not handing over survivors to your labor camps. A beat of silence, then the line crackled with laughter. Cold. Mechanical. Your defiance amuses, but the Council has declared your species' claims void. You are relics, extinct by decree. The transmission cut and alarms blared as targeting locks painted the Corvette red. Rao slammed the throttle forward, the ship lurching into a tight spiral. Evasive now. Stars streaked across the viewport as she wove through debris from a nearby asteroid field. The frigate's first beam, slicing harmlessly into rock. Thorn gripped the arms of his seat, calculating vectors in his head. Port side clear. Use the cluster at bearing 270, it'll mask us. Hale fired a spread of decoys, the bursts flaring bright against the void. They're adapting. Shields at 62%. Tension coiled in the air, thick as engine smoke. The plan was simple. Lose them in the rocks, jump to the relay point, deliver the miners' data to the resistance. But as another beam grazed the hull, sparking cascades of sparks in the corridor behind, doubt flickered. The wounded miner's flatline echoed in Thorn's mind. Not just a loss, but a reminder of the cost piling up. Rao's hands blurred on the controls, her grit shining through. Holding pattern. 2 minutes to the jump window. But the frigate closed, its superior engines shrugging off the debris. Hale cursed, switching to manual targeting. One shot. Make it count. Thorn spotted it then. A weak point in the frigate's pursuit vector. A narrow gap between tumbling boulders. Human ingenuity kicked in, raw and unpolished. Rao, full burn on my mark, aim for the shadow. Hale, ripple fire on their sensors when we pass. It was crazy, threading the needle blind, but their ship was built for it. Tough, adaptable, unlike the Council's pristine machines. Mark, Rao shouted. The Corvette surged, engines roaring defiance. Boulders loomed close enough to scrape paint as Hale's shots lanced out, blinding the frigate's arrays in a bloom of fire. The alien ship veered, buying them seconds, enough to align with the jump point. Alarms peaked as the relay engaged, space folding around them in a wrench of acceleration. They emerged in uncharted space, the frigate left behind, but the cost lingered. A hull breach venting atmosphere, and the weight of one less voice in the fight. Hale slumped back, exhaling sharply. We made it, barely. Thorn met her gaze, the bridge lights flickering like a heartbeat. For now. But they won't stop. Rao wiped sweat from his brow, the acrid tang of scorched wiring stinging his nostrils as he sealed the last patch on the hull breach. The emergency klaxons had finally silenced. But the ship groaned like a wounded beast, its corridors dim under flickering emergency lights. Hale leaned against the bulkhead, her rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes scanning the readouts on the makeshift console. Structural integrity at 60%. We're holding. But one more hit like that frigate's barrage and we're space dust. Thorn paced the cramped engineering bay, his jaw set in that familiar line of grim determination. He wasn't one for panic, never had been, not since the early days when humanity's ragtag fleet first stared down the Council's armadas. Rao, how long until we can risk another jump? We can't drift here forever. Uncharted space means unknowns, and unknowns mean trouble. Rao straightened, flexing his grease-streaked hands. 2 hours, maybe 3. The relay's fried, but I can reroute power from non-essentials. Life support's priority. Mark's still out cold from that decompression hit. He glanced toward the med bay door, where their pilot lay hooked to the auto dock, his face pale under the hum of revival fluids. Losing him now would gut them. Mark's quick reflexes had saved their hides more times than Thorn could count. Hale pushed off the wall, her boots thudding softly on the grated floor. She was the cautious one, always calculating odds, but her voice carried an edge of steel. Scans show nothing yet, no Council signatures, no debris fields. But that doesn't mean we're clear. They could have tagged us before the jump. If they did, we're sitting ducks. Thorn nodded, halting his pace to study the holographic star map flickering before him. Dots of light swirled in the void, uncharted nebulae glowing like distant fires. We adapt, always have. Rao, get that relay singing. Hale, you're on watch. Cycle the external cams every 10 minutes. I'll check on Mark. He clapped Rao on the shoulder, a brief gesture of camaraderie that spoke volumes in the silence. Humans didn't break. They bent, they improvised, they endured. As Thorn slipped into the med bay, the door hissed shut behind him. Mark stirred under the lights, his eyelids fluttering. Captain, we make it? His voice rasped, weak but laced with that wry humor that kept morale from crumbling. Barely as usual. Thorn pulled up a stool, the metal cold against his palms. Rest up. We need your hands on the stick soon. Council's not done with us yet. Outside, the ship drifted through the star-speckled black, a fragile speck against the infinite. But in that fragility lay their strength, raw, unyielding human grit. Hale's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain picking up something. Anomalous readings, bearing 047. Not Council tech, too erratic. Thorn's pulse quickened. He stood, hand instinctively dropping to his sidearm. On my way. The bridge was a hive of tension when he arrived. Hale hunched over the sensors. Rao already patching in from engineering. The anomaly resolved on the main screen. A derelict structure, half buried in an asteroid field, its silhouette jagged and ancient. Not Council design, too organic, too improvised, like something scavenged from a forgotten war. Looks like a way station, Hale murmured, zooming in. The image sharpened. Vines of cabling snaked across its hull, pulsing with faint energy signatures. Abandoned, maybe. But it's emitting a distress beacon. Old protocol, pre-Council expansion. Rao's face appeared on a side monitor, his eyes narrowing. Could be a trap. Or salvage. We need parts for the relay. Could shave hours off repairs. Thorn weighed it, the risk coiling in his gut. Drifting meant vulnerability. Action meant a chance. Hale, suit up. You're with me on EVA. Rao, keep the engines warm. If it's hot, we pull back fast. They moved with practiced efficiency, sealing helmets and clipping tethers in the airlock. The void yawned beyond the outer hatch, stars sharp as knives. Hale's voice in his earpiece was steady. Tether secure. Launching in 3, 2. The gentle push of thrusters carried them into the black, the asteroid field looming like a graveyard of stone giants. Debris tumbled lazily, glinting in the distant sun's light. The derelict grew larger, its surface pitted and scarred, a relic from some long-extinct race, or perhaps a human outlier, lost to the Council's purges. As they neared, Hale's scanner beeped. Energy spike. Its active life signs? No mechanical. Automated defenses? Thorn's grip tightened on his maneuvering controls. Eyes open. If it twitches wrong, we abort. They docked at a ragged airlock, mag boots clamping with a solid thunk. Inside, the structure was a maze of shadowed corridors, emergency lights long dead, replaced by the eerie glow of bioluminescent fungi creeping along the walls, a stark image against the cold metal. Hale swept her flashlight ahead, illuminating faded murals of unfamiliar constellations. Feels wrong, she whispered over the comms. Like we're guests in a tomb. Thorn didn't argue. His boot crunched on something brittle. Shards of crystal, perhaps data storage, shattered eons ago. They pressed on, reaching the core chamber. A vast dome cracked open to space, consoles humming faintly. At the center, a pedestal held a glowing orb pulsing like a heartbeat. Jackpot, Hale breathed. Power core, compatible with our relay. If we can extract it. But as Thorn reached out, the orb flared. Alarms wailed in an alien tongue and panels slid open, revealing turrets whirring to life. Bolts of energy sizzled past, scorching the pedestal where the orb still pulsed. Thorn dove behind a console, the energy bolt carving a molten scar into the pedestal where the orb still pulsed. Hale scrambled after him, her suit's servos whining as she hauled herself into cover. The air hummed with the whine of charging turrets, their alien mechanisms clicking like impatient insects. Options? Thorn barked, peeking out to fire a suppressing burst from his rifle. The shot sparked off the nearest turret, but it didn't falter. Adapted maybe, or just tougher than their intel suggested. Hale patched into the chamber's fading network, her gauntlet screen flickering with garbled code. Orbs linked to defenses. Extracting it triggered a cascade. We cut power here or we become part of the archaeology. Her voice stayed level, but her fingers flew across the interface, rerouting what she could. Another bolt lanced past, shattering a panel above them in a spray of sparks. Thorn felt the heat bloom against his visor, the acrid scent of vaporized alloy seeping through his filters. He rolled left, sighting down his barrel at the turret's base. A grenade from his belt, primitive by Council standards but reliable. He lobbed it underhand, the explosive tumbling in low gravity. The blast rocked the chamber, crumpling the turret's housing in a plume of debris. But two more swiveled toward the noise, their targeting lights painting red webs across the dome. One down. That's not a win, Thorn grunted, pulling Hale deeper into the shadows of a toppled statue. Some robed figure, now headless, clutching an empty scroll. She nodded, sweat beading under her helmet despite the chill. Relaying schematics to the ship. If Jax can remote jam from orbit. Static crackled in her earpiece. No response. The ruin's interference field was thickening, like the whole structure waking up angry. Thorne's mind raced through their kit. Mag clamps, breaching charges, the emergency beacon they'd held back for extraction. Nothing screamed override ancient death machine, but humans didn't climb out of the gravity well by playing fair. The shards from the hall, crystal data drives. If they're conductive. Hale's eyes lit behind her visor. Improvise a Faraday cage. Disrupt the targeting array. She yanked a loose panel from the console, exposing wiring that glowed faintly blue. Thorne covered her, picking off sensor nodes with precise shots. Each hit buying seconds, but the turrets adapted, their fire tightening. They worked fast, Hale stripping conduits while Thorne gathered the brittle shards from his pouch, the ones that had crunched underfoot earlier. He crushed them into powder with his boot, mixing it into a makeshift paste with sealant from his repair kit. The turrets bore down, one grazing his shoulder plate with a sizzle that numbed his arm. Got a loop, Hale said, slamming the panel back. She daubed the crystal paste across exposed circuits, creating jagged insulators. The nearest turret stuttered, its beam veering wild into the cracked dome, punching a fresh hole to the void. Thorne grinned fiercely. Human voodoo works. He surged forward, rifle barking to draw fire while Hale crawled toward the orb. The pedestal hummed louder now, as if protesting. She reached it, fingers hovering, then plunged a jury-rigged probe into the base, bypassing the extraction lock with raw voltage from their suit batteries. Alarms peaked, the chamber vibrating. A final turret zeroed on her, but Thorne tackled it from the flank, slamming a charge onto its mount. The explosion hurled him back, armor scorched and servos sparking. Hale yanked the probe free. The orb dimmed, defenses powering down in a cascade of dying whirs. She dragged Thorne upright, the orb clutched in her arms like a swaddled infant. Core's ours. But the ship's signal, it's weak. Interference holding. He tested his arm, wincing. Then we run. Council's ghosts won't claim us today. They bolted for the corridor, the ruin groaning behind them. As if the extinct had one last grudge to settle, Hale's boots pounded the deck plating, the orb's weight pulling at her like an anchor in zero-G. But gravity clamps held firm for now. Sparks danced from Thorne's damaged arm as he matched her stride, his rifle sweeping the corridor ahead. The ship's groans deepened into something primal, bulkheads flexing as if the vessel itself were awakening to avenge its core's theft. Interference fields thinning, Thorne grunted, glancing at his HUD. Council beacons punching through, ETA on their interceptors. 2 minutes if we don't jam it harder. She shoved him toward a junction, the orb's faint hum vibrating against her chest. Then we improvise. That auxiliary bay we passed, vent the plasma relays. It'll fry the transmitter without blowing us to atoms. He nodded, no time for debate, and veered left, his good hand clamping onto a service hatch. It resisted, sealed by centuries of neglect, but he drove his elbow into the release, metal buckling under the force. The hatch popped with a hiss of stale air, revealing a tangle of conduits glowing faintly blue. Inside, the air tasted of ozone and rust. Hale set the orb down gently on a crate. Its surface cooled despite the chaos, and yanked a toolkit from her belt. Wires snaked everywhere, alien script etched into the casings, warnings from a race that had long since crumbled to dust. She traced the main line to the beacon array, fingers steady despite the adrenaline spike. Thorne wedged his bulk into the space beside her, rifle propped against his shoulder to cover the entrance. Hear that? Drones inbound. Council's automated defenses don't quit easy. The hum grew to a whine, shadows flickering at the corridor's end. Hale sliced through insulation with her multi-tool, exposing a nexus of power feeds. Got the relay. If we cross-feed from the emergency banks, a drone burst into view, sleek and angular, its targeting laser painting Thorne's chest. He fired first, the shot shearing off a stabilizer fin, but it barreled forward, weapons priming with a high-pitched charge. Down! Hale dove, dragging Thorne with her as the drone unleashed a burst of plasma that scorched the hatch frame. Alarms blared anew, the ship shuddering as if in sympathy. Thorne rolled, bringing his rifle to bear, and put 2 rounds through the drone's core. It exploded in a shower of fragments, but the noise drew more. 2, then 3, swarming the junction like angry hornets. Plan B, he barked, hauling the orb as Hale scrambled up. We lure him into the vents, use the conduits as a choke. She didn't argue. They retreated deeper into the bay, Thorne laying suppressive fire while Hale rigged a hasty barrier from loose panels. The drones pressed, their shots glancing off armor, heating it to uncomfortable levels. One clipped her shoulder, sending pain lancing through her suit, but she bit it down, focusing on the orb's steady pulse. The key to proving the Council's so-called evolution was just arrogance etched in silicon. Thorn grabbed a severed cable, its end sparking wildly, and jammed it into a drone's intake as it rounded the corner. Electricity arced, the machine convulsing before detonating, chain reacting the one behind it. Shrapnel pinged off walls, buying them seconds. Relays exposed, Hale said, sweat beading under her helmet. She plunged the cable from the emergency bank into the Nexus, raw power surging. The ship's lights flickered, the beacon's signal warping into static across their comms. But the last drone adapted, hovering low and firing a grappling line that snagged Thorn's leg, yanking him off balance. He crashed into a console, the orb nearly slipping from Hale's grasp as she lunged to steady it. "Thorn!" She fired blindly, the shot wild, but it severed the grapple. He kicked free, scorched leg servos whining, and crushed the drone under his boot with a roar that echoed like defiance. The interference solidified, the beacon silenced. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths and the ship's settling creaks. Hale helped him up, the orb secure once more. Core safe. But that stunt drained the aux power. Hull integrity's dropping fast. He tested his leg, grimacing. Then we pushed to the extract point. Humanity's not done writing this extinction notice. They moved out, the corridors darker now, shadows lengthening as the ship began its final, resentful decay. Thorn limped ahead, his boot scraping sparks against the grated floor as the corridor groaned like a beast in its death throes. Hale followed close, the orb tucked under her arm, its faint hum the only steady sound in the dying ship. Alarms flickered red overhead, warning of cascading failures, bulkheads buckling, air seals hissing their last. "Extract points 2 decks up," Thorn growled, punching the lift override. The doors shuddered but held, the car descending instead of rising. Damn it. Sabotage or just bad luck? Hale scanned the panel, fingers flying over exposed wiring. Both councils jamming the relays. "We climb." She pried the doors wider, revealing the shaft's yawning drop, lit by emergency strips that sputtered like dying fireflies. He nodded, slinging his rifle. No time for complaints. They wedged into the shaft, Thorn boosting her first with his good leg. Metal ladders rattled under their weight, the ship's vibrations shaking loose rivets that pinged into the abyss below. Halfway up, a new rumble shook the walls, deeper, more deliberate. Not the ship's decay. Drones. Hale's eyes met Thorn's in the dim light. "They're hurting us." Toward the core breach. Thorn's jaw tightened. The Council's vanguard, those sleek hunter drones, slithered from vents like silver serpents, their energy fields crackling. One latched onto the ladder, forcing Hale to swing out, her free hand clutching the orb as she fired one-handed. The shot grazed it, shearing off a probe, but 2 more joined the fray. "Go!" Thorn bellowed, dropping to cover her ascent. He unleashed a burst, the recoil jarring his injured leg, but the drones adapted, shields flaring to absorb the hits. One broke through, its claw raking his shoulder, drawing blood that welled hot and sticky. Hale reached the upper hatch, kicking it open with a clang. "Thorn now!" She extended her arm, but he was pinned, the ladder buckling under drone fire. Sparks flew, melting rungs. He grabbed a loose panel, hurling it like a shield, improvised human style, smashing into the lead drone and buying seconds. With a grunt, he vaulted up, Hale's grip hauling him through just as the shaft below collapsed in a cascade of debris. They tumbled into the access corridor, the orb rolling free for a heartbeat before Hale snatched it back. Breathing hard, Thorn pressed against the wall, blood seeping through his torn suit. That was too close. Extracts compromised, signals dead. Hale patched into the nearest console, her face illuminated by the flickering readouts. The ship's schematics danced before her, hull breaches widening, the Council's fleet closing in from scans. But there, a faint auxiliary pod bay overlooked in the chaos. "We improvise. Life pods have emergency beacons. Rig the orb signal through one. It'll punch through their jam." Thorn smirked through the pain, wiping blood from his eyes. "Human hack. Let's burn this ship on our way out." They pushed forward, the corridor narrowing as bulkheads warped, steam hissing from ruptured lines. Drones buzzed in pursuit, but the humans moved like a unit, Thorn laying suppressive fire, Hale rigging charges from scavenged cells to seal paths behind them. At the pod bay, the last drone cornered them, its field pulsing with lethal intent. Thorn charged, not with tech, but raw momentum, tackling it into a sparking console, his hands crushing its core in a vice of determination. Circuits fried, the machine went limp. Hale sealed the pod, the orb interfaced, its signal blooming like a defiant star. Launch in 30. Council's extinction notice is served. Thorne collapsed into the seat beside her, the pod's hatch sealing with a finality that echoed their resolve. As acceleration pinned them back, the ship erupted in the viewscreen, a fireball against the void. The Council's hubris reduced to ash. The pod shuddered through the debris field, engines humming a low defiant growl as Thorne gripped the armrests, his knuckles white against the worn synth leather. Hale's fingers danced over the interface, her eyes locked on the flickering hollow screen where the Council's armada icons blinked like hungry eyes closing in. "They're vectoring interceptors," she said, voice steady but edged with the strain of holding it all together. "We bought time, but not enough. That signal's our only shot. It's broadcasting the Extinction Protocol wideband." Thorne nodded, wiping sweat from his brow, the acrid tang of fried circuit still clinging to his skin from the Bay fight. He could feel the pod's hull creaking under micro-impacts from the wreckage, each one a reminder of the ship they'd just turned to slag. No turning back now. The Council's hubris had painted a target on every human holdout. But this orb, their scavenged relic from the old wars, carried the kill code, a virus woven from human codebreakers' grit, designed to unravel the Overlord's neural nets from the inside. "Status on the bloom?" he asked, leaning forward as the view screen filled with the void's cold black stars streaking past in acceleration's blur. Hale glanced at him, her cautious nature showing in the brief hesitation before she answered. 80%. It's infiltrating their command lattice, slow, but it's burrowing deep. If we can thread the needle past those interceptors, it'll hit critical mass." She adjusted a slider, rerouting power from life support to the transmitter, the air in the pod growing thicker, warmer, a calculated risk. They'd breathe easier later if there was a later. Alarms blared suddenly, red lights pulsing across the console, an interceptor locked on, its tractor beam lancing out like a whip. The pod bucked, inertial dampers whining as Thorne slammed the evasion controls. "Hold on!" He jinked left, the beam grazing their shields in a shower of sparks visible even through the armored glass. Hale braced against the panel, her mind racing through contingencies, reroute auxiliary thrusters. No, that'd fry the orb. "Improvise a decoy from the pod's emergency flares?" "Got an idea," she said, not waiting for approval. Her hands flew, patching the pod's distress beacon into the orb's output, twisting the signal into a mimicry of a Council drone's cry for aid. It was human ingenuity at its rawest. Turn their enemies' own protocols against them. The interceptor hesitated, its beam flickering as the false signal pulled it toward a drifting chunk of hull from their exploded ship. Thorne grinned through gritted teeth, pushing the pod into a tight spiral. "Clever. Keep it up." The maneuver bought them seconds, the interceptor veering off just as two more closed from flanking angles. Energy fire stitched the void, one bolt clipping their aft stabilizer. The pod spun wildly, gravity pulling at their guts as systems screamed overload. Hale's face paled, but her voice cut sharp. "Shields at 20%, orbs at 95, almost there." She sealed the patch, sweat beading on her forehead, the pod's hum turning ragged. Thorne leveled them out, eyes on the incoming signatures. No room for error. He fired the pod's meager countermeasures, smoke and chaff billowing into the black, while Hale monitored the virus's spread. Icons on her screen began to stutter, Council ships listing in formation, their vaunted evolution glitching into chaos. One interceptor exploded in a silent bloom of plasma, its core fried by the creeping code. The lead pursuer bore down, weapons hot. Thorne met Hale's gaze, a silent pact in the tension. "Now or never," he muttered. She nodded, slamming the final command. The orb pulsed, its signal erupting like a supernova in the network. Alarms across the armada lit up. The Council's fleet convulsed, drives failing, weapons silencing as the extinction protocol cascaded through their shared mind. The lead interceptor drifted past inert, a ghost in the void. Thorne eased the pod's throttle, the chase dissolving into eerie quiet. Hale exhaled, slumping back. "It's done. Their lattice is collapsing, ships going dark one by one." But triumph carried weight. Scans showed colonies in uproar, human outposts blinking warnings of fallout. The cost, orphaned networks, shattered alliances, a galaxy reshaping in the aftermath. Thorn steered toward the nearest jump point, the stars ahead unbroken. Humanity's verdict stood etched in code and fire. They endured.